Jake's hands touched the handlebars of his Harley Davidson one last time. As he stared at the "For Sale, $10,000" sign, something gnawed at him inside. This was the last gift from his father, who had lost his battle with cancer. But now the electric bill, rent, credit card debts, they all sat in a pile of papers on the kitchen table, and this motorcycle was his only way out. But that day, on that ordinary Los Angeles street, Ozzy Osbourne would step out of a black Mercedes and make an insane offer. Don't think for a second he was going to hand Jake some of his millions. No, that was too ordinary for Ozzy. He had something else in mind. Maybe no buyer will come today, Jake thought. Maybe I can get a little more time. But deep down, he knew it was just avoidance. The facts wouldn't change. Either he'd sell the bike, or he'd lose everything. He'd been sitting there since morning. A few people had looked at the motorcycle, but when they saw the price, they kept walking. $10,000 wasn't really that much, especially for this model, but apparently nobody had that kind of cash on hand. Jake had no other options because the credit card company had issued its final warning, and his landlord was threatening to file for eviction. Scenarios played over and over in his head. If he sold the bike, he could pay off his debts but lose his father's memory. If he didn't sell it, he'd be out on the street. Both choices were killing him from the inside. Metallica started playing from one of the nearby houses, The Unforgiven. He'd been listening to Metallica since he was 16, and even now, at 26, it still hit him the same way it did the first time. Jake let his ears focus on that sound. At least it could pull him away from his thoughts. Then a different sound from the end of the street caught his attention. Not a motorcycle. This was softer, more luxurious. A black Mercedes was slowly approaching. The windows were tinted too dark to see inside, but the car stopped right in front of Jake's house. At first, Jake thought they'd stopped by mistake. Maybe they were lost. But the rear window slowly rolled down, and an old man's face appeared. Long hair, sunglasses, and that familiar smile. Jake's heart stopped for a moment. This couldn't be. Ozzy Osbourne. The 70-year-old legend in the back seat of a Mercedes, right in front of his yard. Ozzy looked out the window, saw the Harley in the yard, and an expression crossed his face, like he'd just spotted an old friend. He said something to his driver, then the door opened, and Ozzy slowly stepped out of the car. Jake sat frozen. Should he say something? Should he wave? Or was this a hallucination? Maybe from hunger, stress, sleeplessness. Maybe he was seeing things. But Ozzy took the first step, opened the small gate to the yard, and walked in, slowly circling the motorcycle. His hands caressed the paint, examined the wheels, like one craftsman appreciating another's work. Jake stood up, his legs trembling. "Hello," he stammered a bit. I mean... Ozzy lifted his head and looked directly at Jake. Even through his sunglasses, Jake could see his eyes. Tired, but just as warm. 1995 model, isn't it? Ozzy asked. Jake was so shocked he could only nod. Yes, he finally said. My dad bought it when it was brand new. Ozzy nodded in acknowledgement. He placed one hand on the bike's seat, like he was greeting an old friend. Man had taste, your dad, he said, then looked at the sign. For sale, huh? $10,000. There was a question in his voice, but no pressure, just curiosity. Jake's throat tightened. What could he say? Yeah, I have debts. Seemed too simple, but how else could he explain it? The storm inside him, the sleepless nights, the hospital room where his father took his last breath, the motorcycle keys he handed him that day, saying, Listen, son, never sell your freedom. But now here he was, selling that freedom for exactly $10,000. Ozzy, as if reading Jake's mind, slowly came closer. You know, Ozzy said, I lost everything once too. His voice was different now, more fragile. Jake's eyebrows furrowed. Ozzy Osbourne lost everything? But how? Ozzy continued, leaning slightly against the motorcycle, his eyes drifting into the distance. The 80s. Those were bad times. Drugs, alcohol, everything was upside down. Debts to managers and studios. Most importantly, the debt I owed myself. One day I woke up, and the man I saw in the mirror wasn't me anymore. Sharon told me one day, "Ozzy, either you change or it's all over." It was a harsh thing to say, but it was true. Jake's heart raced. This conversation couldn't be real, but it was happening. Ozzy's voice was lower now, like he was sharing a secret. I had to sell things I loved back then. Even one of my guitars, a 1960 Gibson Les Paul. Of course, I couldn't play guitar, but God, I loved that thing so much. Sometimes when we'd get into the studio, Zakk Wylde would play it. Every note, every string reminded me of something. But you know what? Ozzy turned to Jake, a strange peace in his eyes. By selling that guitar, I bought myself back a little, because priorities changed. It wasn't about possessions anymore. It was about life, about living. Jake's eyes welled up. He hadn't expected this. Ozzy Osbourne, the legendary rock star, was telling him his own story, but something was still missing. Ozzy hadn't said why he was here. As if he'd heard the question, Ozzy laughed softly. Not that famous devilish laugh of his. This one was more human. "You're wondering, aren't you, why I'm here?" he said. Jake lowered his head in embarrassment, but Ozzy continued. "Today I told my driver, let's take a drive. Let's go a different way. I'd just left the doctor's office, routine checkup, but these checkups were starting to feel suffocating. You're 70 years old, your body constantly reminding you of things. I wanted to clear my head, told him let's take the side streets instead of the main road. I do that sometimes. Watch the streets, wonder about people's lives. Then I saw the bike, saw that sign, and I said, stop, because that sign reminded me of something. It reminded me of myself." Jake couldn't hold back the tears anymore. I love this motorcycle," he said, his voice shaking. "Even when my dad got his cancer diagnosis, he took me out riding on this bike." He said, "Jake, this bike is yours. But don't just see it as a piece of metal. This is freedom. And now I'm selling it. I feel like I'm betraying him." Silence fell between them, only the sound of wind rustling through leaves. Ozzy took a deep breath, gently touched Jake's shoulder, his hand warm, real. "Listen, son," he said. "The freedom your father gave you isn't in this motorcycle itself. He gave you the strength to survive, the courage to face hardships. By selling this bike, you're surviving, and that means your father is still with you, you understand?" Jake nodded, but the emptiness was still there inside. Ozzy noticed, thought for a moment, then pulled his wallet from his pocket. Jake's eyes widened. No, please," he said immediately. "I'm not asking you for money, But Ozzy raised his hand to stop him. Easy, he said with a smile. "I'm not giving you money, at least not right now. But I'm going to make you an offer." Jake's heart raced again. What kind of offer? Ozzy looked at the bike, then at Jake. "Sell me this motorcycle," he said. $10,000, exactly what you're asking. But I have one condition." Jake's breath caught. A condition? What condition could Ozzy Osbourne possibly have? Maybe he wanted to display the bike in his collection, maybe use it in a music video. But the expression on Ozzy's face wasn't any of that. It was serious, but just as gentle. Jake swallowed. "What condition?" he asked, his voice still trembling. Ozzy took a deep breath, slowly sat on the motorcycle's seat, rested his cane against his knees. "Here's the condition," he said, his eyes locking onto Jake's. "I'm going to give this motorcycle back to you. But in 6 months." Jake's head spun. What did that mean? Ozzy continued, his voice calm but determined. "I'll give you the $10,000, pay off your debts, get yourself together. But within 6 months, you're going to pay me back that money. How you do it is up to you. You'll find a job, you'll work, you'll fight. And in 6 months, if you pay the money back, this bike will be yours again." Jake stood frozen. This offer was too good to be real. But why?" he finally asked, his voice barely a whisper. Ozzy laughed softly. "Because I needed a chance like this once too, son," he said. "Sharon gave me that chance. She gave me a purpose, a reason to stay standing. If you sell this bike now, yeah, your debts will be gone, but something inside you will break. When your father left you this motorcycle, he didn't just leave you metal, he was trying to teach you to believe in yourself. I'm giving you that same chance. 6 months, $10,000. If you can do this, you'll pay off your debt and get your bike back. If you can't..." Ozzy shrugged. "Then the bike becomes mine. But at least you'll have tried." Jake's mind was racing. Did this make sense? Could he save $10,000 in 6 months? He was unemployed right now. But maybe he could find something. Restaurants, construction sites, whatever it took. But what if he failed? Then he'd lose the bike anyway and... Wait, wasn't he about to sell the bike already? At least this way he'd have a shot. Ozzy stood up, looked at Jake, waiting. "What do you say, son?" he asked. "Ready to fight?" Something stirred inside Jake, something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Maybe, just maybe, he could do this. "Yes," Jake said, his voice more determined now. "Yes, I accept." Ozzy smiled broadly and opened his wallet, pulling out a business card. "This is my assistant's number," he said, handing the card to Jake. "Call her tomorrow. She'll arrange everything. The bike will be moved to my storage, and we'll deposit the money into your account. 6 months from now, same day, we'll meet right here. Then you'll either get your bike back, or you'll say goodbye. Deal?" Jake nodded, taking the card with trembling hands. "Deal," he said, his voice hoarse. Ozzy patted Jake's shoulder one last time, then slowly walked toward the car. The driver opened the door. As Ozzy got in, he looked at Jake one more time and waved. "See you, son. And remember, the fight isn't just out there. It's in here, too." The car slowly pulled away. Jake stood there, staring at the business card in his hand. Had this really just happened? The next day, Jake called the number on the card. The woman was very professional and handled everything smoothly. The bike was picked up that afternoon, and the money was deposited into Jake's account. $10,000. Jake stared at the screen. The numbers were there, but it didn't feel real. He immediately started paying off his debts. Credit card company, landlord, electric bill. With each payment, the weight on his shoulders seemed to lighten, but at the same time, there was a fear inside him. 6 months. $10,000. How was he going to save that money? The first week, he started looking for work. He applied everywhere. Restaurants, hotels, stores, construction sites. Most places never called back. Some gave him interviews, but nothing came of it. By the end of the second week, he finally landed a dishwashing job at a restaurant. The pay wasn't much, but it was a start. He worked from 6 in the morning until 10 at night, his hands constantly exposed to soap and hot water, his skin cracked. But he didn't complain. Every day on his way home he'd write in the small notebook in his pocket. Saved $80 today, left to go $9,920. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Jake found a second job, started working construction on weekends. Now he was working 70 hours a week, his body exhausted, but his mind clear. Every night before bed, he'd look at his father's photograph. "I'm going to do it, Dad," he'd whisper. "I'm going to get your bike back." By the end of the 3rd month, he'd saved $4,500. He was past the halfway point, but time was flying. In the 4th month, something went wrong. He had a small accident at the construction site, hurt his foot, couldn't work for 2 weeks. He was panicking, losing precious time. But the restaurant owner helped him out. "You can work at the front desk. You don't need to be on your feet," he said. Jake was grateful. Every little bit of help mattered now. When the 5th month came around, he had $7,800. Still short, but close. Every day he worked more, ate less, slept less. His friends were starting to worry. "Jake, you're pushing yourself too hard," they'd say. But he wouldn't listen. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about proving something. To his father, to Ozzy, but most importantly, to himself. In the last week of the 6th month, Jake made his final move. He sold some of his old stuff. TV, laptop, wristwatch. Everything was on the table now. When the last day came, he checked his account. $9,950. He was $50 short. $50 goddamn dollars. He panicked. What was he going to do? Then he looked at his phone. A message from an old friend. Jake, I forgot I owed you that $100. Sending it to your account now. Jake nearly broke down crying. Was it fate? Coincidence? He didn't know and he didn't care. The money came through. Now he had $10,050. It was enough. More than enough. The meeting day arrived. Jake went to the yard, sat in the same spot. His heart was pounding. That afternoon, the familiar black Mercedes appeared at the end of the street, followed by a truck. They slowly approached and stopped. The door opened, and Ozzy stepped out. He looked a bit more tired this time, but his smile was still there. Jake jumped to his feet, holding an envelope with $10,000 inside. I did it, Jake said, his voice trembling but proud. I did it, Mr. Osbourne. Ozzy took the envelope, counted the money, then looked at Jake. There was pride in his eyes, maybe even a tear. I knew you would, he said softly. Ozzy signaled to the truck driver. The back opened, and there it stood. Jake's Harley. It gleamed like it had just been cleaned yesterday. Jake approached, put his hands on the bike, tears streaming down his face. Your father would be proud of you, son, Ozzy said, coming up beside him. You didn't just save a motorcycle, you saved yourself. That's real freedom. Your father was trying to teach you that. And you got it. Jake turned to Ozzy. Thank you, he said, his voice choked. I don't know what to say. Ozzy shook his head. You don't need to say anything. Just live, fight, and never give up. And you know, he said with that devilish grin, maybe one day you'll give someone else this same chance. Jake smiled. For the first time in months, he truly smiled. Ozzy got into the car. The window rolled down. He looked at Jake one last time. Rock on, son, he said, and take care of that bike. The car slowly pulled away. Jake stood there with his motorcycle. But this time it was different. The bike wasn't just a hunk of metal anymore, wasn't just a memory. It was a symbol, a reminder. That night, Jake slept soundly for the first time in months. When he woke up in the morning, he went out to the yard, looked at the bike. The sun was just rising, light dancing across the metallic paint. He sat on the seat, turned the key, the engine rumbled to life. That sound, it was like his father's voice, Ozzy's voice, his own voice. He twisted the throttle and slowly started down the street. The wind hit his face, his hair whipped around, but for the first time he felt free, truly free. Because now he knew. Freedom wasn't a motorcycle, wasn't a possession. Freedom was waking up every morning and fighting again.